She never heard him enter. The door to her apartment had been locked. Of that she was sure. It was the only thing that gave her any peace of mind when she went to bed that night, already rattled by the whispers spreading across Gainesville like wildfire. Girls had been disappearing, then showing up in pieces. Her roommate was out. She had triple-checked the lock, pulled the chain tight, and pushed the chair against the knob for good measure. She'd even left a lamp on in the corner, childish maybe, but comforting. She was asleep for only an hour when something stirred. The sound was faint, barely more than a shift in air, but her body registered the wrongness before her mind caught up. She opened her eyes. The lamp was off. She didn't have time to scream. By morning, her blood would streak the walls. Her roommate would be found in a similar state, posed like dolls in a macabre scene the killer choreographed for whoever would find them next. This wasn't just murder. This was something darker, something designed to frighten long after the violence was over, and it had only just begun. In the fall of 1990, Gainesville, Florida, was supposed to feel safe. It was the start of a new semester. Thousands of students were pouring into town to attend the University of Florida. Dorm rooms buzzed with fresh reunions and nervous introductions, apartments filled with takeout boxes, textbooks, and the optimism of early adulthood. The sun was out, the weather was warm, the future felt wide open, and then, suddenly, it didn't. On August 24th, just days before classes began, police were called to a student apartment. Inside, they found two bodies, 18-year-old Sonia Larson and 17-year-old Christina Powell. Both were first-year freshmen. Both had been raped, stabbed, and mutilated. One of them had been posed in a deliberately obscene and degrading way. The killer had taken his time, cleaned up, wiped down surfaces, turned the thermostat down to slow decomposition. He even removed her nipples and took them with him. The town reeled, but it was only the beginning. The next day, a third victim was discovered. Krista Hoyt, a Santa Fe college student who hadn't shown up for work. She lived alone. The killer broke in through the back door, waited, then attacked. He raped her, stabbed her through the chest, and then, chillingly, returned hours later. He decapitated her. Her head was found posed on a shelf, staring at the spot where her body had been grotesquely positioned. The scene wasn't just horrifying, it was theatrical, ritualistic. The media descended on Gainesville almost overnight. Residents rushed to buy deadbolts, stun guns, even shotguns. Students dropped out in droves. Some professors taught to half-empty classrooms, others canceled lectures entirely. Fear hung in the humid air like smoke. And then, two more bodies. Tracy Pauls and Manuel Taboada were murdered in their apartment just 2 days after Krista Hoyt. Both were college students, good friends, athletic, close. Tracy had been raped and stabbed. Manuel, a former football player, had clearly fought back. His wounds were brutal, defensive, desperate. He'd died trying to save his friend. The killer had overpowered him anyway. This murder broke the pattern. It was the first time he'd gone after a man. But the scene bore the same signature: mutilation, posing, post-mortem taunting. By now, Gainesville had fallen into a full-blown panic. Police were desperate. Tips flooded in by the hundreds. Suspects were questioned, released, questioned again. At one point, a man named Edward Humphrey was arrested, his face swollen and scarred from mental illness and medication. He had a volatile history, a temper, a mugshot that terrified the public. For a moment, it seemed like the case had cracked, but the evidence didn't fit. His DNA didn't match. His history didn't align with the grotesque surgical precision of the killer's rituals. And still, there were no new murders. Then came a quiet revelation in another part of the state. Just months earlier, in November of 1989, a triple homicide had occurred in Shreveport, Louisiana. A family, Tom Grissom, his daughter Julie, and his grandson Sean had been murdered in their home. The brutality was strikingly similar: stabbing, rape, posing. The Grissoms were found arranged in eerie, deliberate positions. One victim had been cleaned, another mutilated. Detectives in Gainesville began to wonder. Was this the same killer? The connection felt thin, until a woman called the Shreveport tip line. She'd seen the news coverage of the Gainesville murders, the staging, the violence, the bizarre ritualism, and it had struck a nerve. Her name was Cindy Juratich. She told investigators about a man she'd known briefly. His name was Danny Rolling. Rolling was a drifter, a scarred, volatile man with a history of abuse and instability. Born in Shreveport, he'd grown up in a violent home. His father, a police officer, had beaten him mercilessly. As a child, Danny would retreat into fantasy, sketching out entire worlds of domination, revenge, and control. His inner life grew darker over time. He began burglarizing homes, stalking women, recording his thoughts in a journal filled with twisted scripture and imagined demons. After fleeing Shreveport following the 1989 murders, Rolling drifted south. He was arrested in Ocala, Florida, just weeks after the Gainesville killings, for robbing a Winn-Dixie supermarket at gunpoint. No one suspected then that they had already captured Florida's most wanted killer. But Cindy's tip changed everything. Police obtained his DNA and matched it to evidence found at the Gainesville crime scenes: a bloody palm print, semen samples. It was him, all of it. In the months that followed, the full horror of Danny Rolling's crimes began to emerge. He had stalked his victims beforehand, watched them, studied their routines. He carried a kit with duct tape, screwdrivers, knives, and audio equipment to record his thoughts afterward. He even had a microphone stand to prop a camera for his personal confessions. And then, there were the songs. Rolling believed he was possessed. He referred to his alter ego as Gemini, after the demonic entity in The Exorcist 3. In custody, he sang eerie ballads about pain and regret. His journals were filled with religious mania, perverse poetry, and rage. He confessed to 5 murders in Gainesville. Then, in a written statement, he admitted to the Grissom family murders in Shreveport as well. He offered no apology, just a warped sense of spiritual justification. In 1994, he was convicted and sentenced to death. It would be another 12 years before his execution. On October 25, 2006, Danny Rolling was put to death by lethal injection. His final meal was lobster tail, butterfly shrimp, baked potato, strawberry cheesecake, and sweet tea. His final words, a song he sang aloud as the chemicals entered his veins. Outside the prison walls, relatives of his victims stood in silence. Some cried, some held each other, some simply watched. Justice, however delayed, had arrived. But the legacy of Danny Rolling didn't end there. In 1996, just 6 years after the Gainesville murders, a horror film premiered to massive success. It featured a college town stalked by a masked killer, a young woman haunted by the past, and a string of gruesome murders that echoed Rolling's eerie pattern. The film was Scream. Its writer, Kevin Williamson, had been watching news coverage of the Gainesville killings when inspiration struck. He turned that real-world terror into fiction, and the story into a franchise. But the roots of that scream were real, and they ran deep. In Gainesville today, the shadows of 1990 still linger. Apartment complexes have been rebuilt. Students come and go. Most don't know the full story of what happened in those blood-soaked final days of summer. The names are whispered sometimes, mostly by those who were there. But behind locked doors and curtained windows, the fear still echoes. Because what made Rolling terrifying wasn't just the brutality, it was how close he got, how invisible he became, how quietly he slipped into their lives, and how much of it he planned just for the performance. Thank you for listening to The Lantern's Tale. If you enjoyed this true story, join us next time, if you dare.